Yep. So my name's Hoffman, or Ian, which is my real name. I live in the UK, in a little city called Salisbury. In terms of retro and stuff, I grew up with things like with ZX81, ZX Spectrum, and the Commodore 64, and eventually ended up with the Commodore Amiga. No, I started as a musician. So the first I've recently did a talk, and I found that the earliest Amiga production that I'd worked on was 1991. And I was 14 years old, and I was writing music for that. So I've been writing music for, and I'm 45 now, so I've been writing music for a very long time. I've never not written music. The DJing I got into kind of when I was about 15, 16 as well, because I was very much into rave music and rave culture in the UK. And then the coding, that really came... I used to do a little bit when I was like 16, 17, but not very much. But the coding's really come into it more in the last 10 to 15 years, I'd say, where my day job was programming. So I started to get to a certain level in programming where I thought, well, actually, I can go and do stuff on the Amiga now, because I've got a bit more skill. I'm a bit better at it. So that's why I started coding on the Amiga, because it's one of those things. You saw demos, but I never actually made any, and I saw games and I never made any. So I was really interested in kind of how all of those things worked, and if I could make my own. That's really easy for me. The best music in any video game ever made is Lost Patrol. Yeah, and to think that that artist made like 3 pieces of music and then never made any more music ever since. It's just, I love that. It's just like, pops out, does like a soundtrack, an amazing soundtrack to a game, and then says, I'm done with that now. Then moves on. So with Metal Gear, I kind of wanted to keep it as close to the original as possible because it's a very beloved game. So I didn't want to change too much of it in case you start kind of, upsetting people, because you don't want that. What we did is I was speaking to Toni, and we agreed to take the portraits from the original Japanese manual, and he did fantastic work on all these. They're basically doing like 16 color versions of those portraits, and then we integrated those portraits into the game, so when you're speaking to people, those portraits come up, when they're in the radio section and stuff. Toni did that for me, and that's kind of how we met. So we were just we've just been like friends ever since, and then obviously we moved on to when we were doing Knightmare. I hadn't intended to port it to Amiga. I was just disassembling the original MSX game because I was curious about, how do you turn a ROM, a binary ROM image, back into source code? And then I started porting it and put all the original graphics in, and then showed it to Toni, and he went, "I will do new graphics." Yeah, because I think with that one, it's because it came from the MSX1. Because Metal Gear was an MSX2 game, it didn't look that far from an Amiga game, right? Because it's a 512 color palette. It's 512 colors, and it's 1024 on the Amiga, so it didn't seem that different. But when we put the 16 color MSX graphics onto the Amiga, it felt like we probably couldn't get away with that because in that instance, I thought, well, maybe if we, let's just bump it to 32 colors, let Toni go off and do his thing, and he did a fantastic job on all the graphics for it. Made it look really lovely. I think it's when you're doing these ports and stuff, you have to kind of balance it out. Like, am I going to change it too much and annoy people, or people on the Amiga going to see it and go, well, that's only 16 colors. Like, why can't you? There's loads more colors to choose from. Why didn't you do this, that, or the other? So kind of balancing up, like, you know, how much you want to change, but not affect the original, but how much you want to like give it a bit of, you know, spit and polish and make it look good. So really, what you start with, if it's porting a game, so a game that already exists, the first thing you start with is the graphical assets, right? So the tiles and the map data, because once you've got that sorted, then you've got your whole game map in, right? You can move around and stuff. So yeah, so really the answer is it's always code first, because you're going to be making code to convert graphics or map data. But yeah, the music seemingly comes pretty late now, because just because I like to get a good chunk of the game kind of working and ready first. I think with for example with Knightmare, the whole game was pretty much done. Toni had done all of the pretty much sure he'd done most of the graphics apart from maybe a couple of levels later on, but I hadn't done any of the music, and I foolishly said, well, I don't want just 4 tunes in it, I want a separate tune for every level and a separate tune for every boss. And I kind of wish I hadn't said that to myself, because it was really hard work. So it was a lot of music to make, for quite a small game. But yeah, the music always comes later, because the thing is you can't really, until you've got the game running and you can play it and you can feel what it's like, you can't really tell what kind of music you would want for it. You need to have that there and to be able to see it move and feel how it plays to kind of determine what kind of music you'd want in there. So
it's a hard thing to put 21 songs into a floppy disk. And if you see most of the Amiga games, most of the homebrew games, you see that maybe they got 1 or 5 songs, but 21 is amazing. It's simply something that you never expect from a homebrew game, and I really appreciate it.
Yeah. So yeah. So the only, there's basically 4, excluding all the they call them like other pieces, like, you know, game start and death and stuff, like the tiny pieces of music. Excluding all of those, the original Knightmare's only got 2 pieces of music for in the game and 2 pieces of music for which they alternate on the bosses. Yeah, for some reason I said no, I want 8 tunes and 8 boss fight musics. so yeah, because I think it's the in terms of the music system that I built, I was able to reuse samples across any tune. So and it was all, you know, what I do is I build like systems and tools that means that I can just go and write the music. I don't need to worry about I've used too many patterns. I've used the same sample in multiple places. All I do is I write the music and then I plug the music in, and then the code then goes off and just cuts everything up, cleans everything up, compresses everything and shoves it all in. So yes, that's a really big part of the kind of the development process. Is you don't want to have to go back to a tune and then go and edit it because you've run out of RAM, because you've left 50 blank patterns in there. You just want a button to do that, right? So press button, do that. So yes, that's where that kind of stuff comes from. Okay. In terms of technical issues, you don't really get that many, because what you have is a 4 megahertz processor and a 7 megahertz processor. So in terms of the power, you know, you can't, it's hard to run out of power. So if the game's running at like 25 frames per second on the MSX, you can almost definitely get it to run at 50 frames per second on the Amiga. There's enough power in it. The the biggest challenge of porting any MSX game really is just making sure that the gameplay is correct. Like that is, you know, it doesn't matter how it sounds or how it looks, right? If it doesn't play correctly as to the original, then what are you even doing? You know, what's the point? So that's a big challenge, because if you don't have the source code, the reason why Metal Gear was done in the first place is because Manuel Pazos had disassembled the original game into source code, and I was able to read that and then port that code. So you're porting the actual code of Metal Gear onto the Amiga, so it runs the same. There's no difference, right? The logic of how enemies move and how the game actually interacts with itself, it's all exactly the same. It's just running on a different processor. So yeah, the biggest challenge is if you want to port an MSX game is how you do it. Do you disassemble the original game cartridge so you can then port all the logic by hand, or do you play the original game and try and recreate that logic yourself? So, you know, I go for the hard option, which is the disassembly, because I want it to be as exact as it possibly can. So yeah, that's the hardest bit. Like adding the music and the graphics afterwards. It's once it's built. As we're saying with the music tools, I have the same for graphics. So once I have the graphics here, I think for Knightmare, I created the tile set for each level. I gave the tiles from the MSX and gave that to Toni, and then Toni would draw over the tiles, and then give me the map back, and I'd drag it into a folder and press a button, and then all of the graphics would just straighten the game. I didn't need to do anything. So so that's why once you've got that set up, like the rest of it's automatic to get new stuff in. So yeah, it's the gameplay is obviously that's the thing that you really need to get right. That's the hardest bit.
Well, it's not well. The challenge is to keep the style of the graphics and not changing it too much to make the game look like something different. Because I saw some incarnation of Knightmare in high resolution or high definition, and it looks pretty different. And we are lucky to get the same resolution, and even with more colors and more details, the game looks look pretty much like the original. It's not too much difference. So everything is better and smoother, and the colors are more vivid, but it's the same. When you see the game is Knightmare, it's the same.
Yeah, it's the style of the graphics that you have to that Toni has to then, you know, it kind of not copy, but just kind of adhere to, like make it look the same but also better, without, because it could very easily, if you go into like 1080p high resolution and then someone draws it all new or whatever, then they could be adding too much of their own stamp onto that, their own style, and then you start losing stuff then, don't you?
Yes.
Yeah.
And then well, it's always a pleasure to take 8-bit graphics and have 32 colors, and whoa, I got 32 colors, is amazing. Now I have all the power here. And that's it.
So the next thing that is going to be released probably around May is a port of a PC game called Secanoid. That's a twin stick shooter, which the original game is styled like a ZX Spectrum game. So it's actually kind of black and white and really kind of 1-bit graphics. So if you imagine a lot of the indie kind of styled retro games you get where they're like, you know, really low in color depth, it looks like that. That has been an absolutely huge challenge because rather than going from the MSX up to the Amiga, which is like 4 megahertz, I've gone from 3 gigahertz down to 7 megahertz, right? So yeah, it's been that has probably been the biggest challenge. So there's but I've tried my best to make it run at 50 frames a second as much as possible, have loads of crazy particle effects, and also make sure that the game plays like the original, but then has a lot of extra bonus bits and pieces in as well. So that's coming out soon, when it's ready, but it's very nearly ready. And after that, I can't tell you what the next thing is. Another port, but I can't tell you what that is yet because it's not been announced. Because this Seekonoid and the next project are going to be released by Thalamus. Now, if you remember Thalamus from the C64 days, basically, so they're going to be publishing that. And then after that, the next project after that will be the Amiga rhythm game. Not quite sure how that's going to look or play yet. I've got some rough ideas, but that'll be I think there might be a fun game that you can play with 2 to 4 people. So we just need to work out what the mechanics of that is. But the reason why I'm doing a rhythm game is because obviously I've got a lot of music that I can just throw in there, so I don't need to write any music. I can just make a game, right? So which would be nice. So yeah, that's the next probably year and a half of my life already mapped out. So thanks for having me. If you want to catch up with me online, my blog is hoffman.home.blog. Or you can catch me streaming game development and DJing on Twitch at twitch.tv/DJH0ffman.
Thank you for having me here, and I am very lucky to be with my friend Hoffman and you, Alexander. And then thank you so much, and I will expect to see you again. Hoffman, you are using a nice lipstick.
It's been cold here today.
Yeah.